Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Ambassadorial Wing, another installment of Afternoons with the Ambassador. And hope you all are having a lovely Sunday afternoon. Hope you all have had a great weekend. I myself, it's been pretty good. And kicking off the month of October with a series of videos covering one of my all-time favorite topics, the monsters of Universal Studios. And before we get started with the stream and the discussion, a little of the usual. Make sure you smash that like button. Make sure you share this out with all of your friends. And if you're not subscribed to the Ambassadorial Wing, check out some of my content or stick around for the stream. And if you like what I'm doing here, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that notification bell. And also, I want to say a very deep thank you to everyone who has subscribed to the Ambassadorial Wing. We just today hit 451 subscribers. And for those of you that follow me on social media, in celebration of this milestone, I will be doing a watch party later this week, probably next weekend, because, well, unfortunately, I work during the week. And we will be doing a watch party for one of my all-time favorite movies from the 1980s. There can be only one, Highlander. And a quick shout to the chat, Arkham Gaming. Arkham, it is good to see you, bud. It's been a while and appreciate you being here. He says, "Hi, Ambassador. How are you doing, Ambassador? Today is my birthday. And was able to get help with all my friends to get Kevin Conroy to say happy birthday to me on Twitter to get that accomplishment." Arkham, from one geek to another, I wish you a very, very happy birthday. And let's see if I can find a good drop for you. Give you just a little something epic and awesome. And what could be more epic than one of my favorite movies, Troy?
If you go to Troy, glory will be yours. The world will remember your name.
Achilles! Get up, Prince of Troy.
So, Arkham, a very happy birthday to you, my friend, and thank you for tuning in today. And also to the chat, well, LDG, good morning, or where I'm at, it's afternoon. And also another good friend of mine, Mountains of Elysium. My friend, is good to see you. So, yeah, you feeling better today. Hope all is well. Yes, geeks, LDG, everything is very, very well. I don't know if you, I think I tagged you on Twitter in this. I finally hit 450 subscribers. Well, actually 451. So, to celebrate that milestone next weekend, I will be doing a watch party over on my Twitch channel for the one and only Highlander. So, and I'll send out the details to that on social media once I get all that set up. But today, like I said, we're going to be kicking off the month of October with a favorite topic of mine, the monsters of Universal. And you might ask yourself, Ambassador, why talk about the Universal monsters? Those are black and white movies. Those are so old that none of us are even alive. Even our parents weren't alive when those come out. Well, here on the Ambassador Wing, we talk about pop culture. And nothing is more pop than the monsters of Universal. And LDG, thank you, man. I appreciate it. So, because the other reason is it's a topic I haven't really discussed before, and I like doing stuff a little bit different on the afternoons with the Ambassador streams and covering stuff that most people wouldn't necessarily cover. I mean, let's be honest. Who would spend a Sunday afternoon talking about the monsters of Universal? Hi. And I know my friend, my fellow geek, MB Geek of MB Geeks Let's Talk, he is also doing a stream today on the Universal Monsters. So once the stream is over, or if you can go over and check out MB Geek and Geek. If you hear this, my bud, I am sorry, this was not deliberate. I was originally going to do this last week, but I was just absolutely tanked from work, so I set it up for today. So please don't think I'm trying to steal your time slot or your audience. But anyway, that all being said, let's jump into the discussion. The monsters of Universal. And this is quite literally one of the great icons of cinema, of pop culture. The monsters, the Universal monsters. I mean, you name it. So, um, you name it: Dracula, Frankenstein, The Bride of Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Wolfman, The Phantom of the Opera, The Invisible Man, The Creature from the Black Lagoon. These are true legends of cinema. These are the movies that we grew up as kids watching every Halloween or just whenever we wanted to watch something scary. And speaking for myself, I love these films. I love some of the sequels that they did. I thought they were, I think they still hold up today. And for those of you that are in the chat, if you want to join me this afternoon in this discussion, as always, the link is pinned in the chat. So if you want to pop on in, give your 2 cents on today's topic, you are more than welcome, as always. But yeah, looking back as a young man, as a young kid, every Halloween, if there was one of the old black and white Universal Monster movies on TV, or when Blockbuster became a thing and we got a VCR every year, just like clockwork, I'd be going to Mother Ambassador and saying, "Are we going to Blockbuster and get the old Universal movie?" She's like, "Well, of course," because even she grew up watching those movies as a kid and as a teenager. And I know somebody asked me, I think it was Thursday night, or no, it was actually last night when I did my stream for Venom Let There Be Carnage. Somebody asked me, or no, it might be on somebody else's stream, one or the other. They asked me, "Well, Ambassador, which do you prefer, the Universal Monsters or the Hammer?" And I have to say a little bit of both, but I love the Universal Monsters because they are truly iconic, and the stories behind just the productions in general are truly interesting. I mean, these films came out during the years of the Great Depression when everybody was having a hard time making movies and making ends meet. And it was like dirt cheap to go to a movie. You could go to a movie for like a nickel. You could go to the old nickel theater and watch one of these films. And I remember when they finally did DVD transfers of the Universal Monsters, and I was like, I finally found a collection, a one case collection of all the Universal Monsters. I had all the ones I listed, except for the Creature from the Black Lagoon. I'm still missing that one, unfortunately. But I think for a lot of us, these movies are and these characters were very unique in how they were presented, because let's be honest here, back in the 1930s and the 1940s, they did not have big budgets. The computers were not even a thing yet, not even remotely, so there was no CGI. It was all practical effects, practical makeup, and in-house music and everything else across the board. The studios, in particular Universal, made these movies go. And you had really innovative makeup designs and special effects at the time. I mean, you want to talk about one of the truly iconic characters of the Universal Monsters, and we're of course talking about Frankenstein. And of course, you cannot talk about Frankenstein without talking about the man himself who brought that creature the character to life. And that, of course, is the late, great, truly great Boris Karloff. And here's a man who was dirt poor, was a working actor, wasn't a huge movie star by any length, even into his later years. But here's a man who put everything he had into bringing this character to life. He helped with the creation of the makeup. He helped with the design of the character and how it acted and how it moved. And yes, I do understand and I do realize that this is a adaptation of Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley's masterpiece, the Frankenstein, the novel. It's not a direct adaptation, but I think what they tried to do with this film, and in particular with its sequel, because here's the crazy thing. If you really think about it and you really consider it, Bride of Frankenstein, in a lot of ways, was the first true sequel to a movie. Now, granted, the Frankenstein franchise has existed in various iterations for decades upon decades upon decades. But looking back on it, looking back on the work that they did with these films, it is astonishing, and it is, if nothing but, very impressive. Because honestly, the people that worked on these movies, that worked on these productions, they were, in a lot of ways, visionaries. They wanted to bring these characters to life. They wanted to tell these stories. And I think what we have with, at least what we have with the first Frankenstein, the one with Boris Karloff and Colin Clive as Henry Frankenstein, or Victor Frankenstein, excuse me. And of course, it's nothing short of monumental. I mean, you have that absolutely iconic scene when they bring the creature down out of the storm, and Frankenstein is standing there just gazing over the creature, and then a lone hand starts to move, and Frankenstein exclaims that iconic line, "It's alive. It's alive. Now I know what it is to be God." Granted, I'm not giving it all his emphasis that he did, but we all know that scene. We all know that line. And it has something that has stood throughout the passage of years. And the question really is, I'll go through each one of these movies on their own, and we'll ask the question, are they still scary? I don't want to necessarily say that the Universal monsters aren't scary. Granted, these movies are very old, very dated, but I think within them that is part of their iconography, because they are something truly special. They are something that we look back upon and admire and respect, because the people that worked on these films were trying to do things that we nowadays would consider just elementary. You plug in a code into a computer and poof, it's done. But for them, they had to pour their blood, sweat, and tears into to get this right. I mean, and I mean that quite literally. I mean, the transformation that Boris Karloff goes through in his performance as the creature. Because here's the thing you have to remember. The monster's name is not Frankenstein. The monster has no name. It's Frankenstein. That's the name. This movie is almost as much about the man who created the monster as the monster itself, or the creature itself. And I think there is a very important lesson that we sometimes forget within this film. Yes, we watch it at Halloween, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's tradition for a lot of us within the geek community. But what Frankenstein teaches us is man was not meant to tinker with nature, much less try to play God. And what Dr. Victor Frankenstein did was he tried to play God. And the novel, it came back to bite him. It cost him a great deal. Now, however, in the movie is somewhat different. In the end, the creature is defeated, and Frankenstein is saved, and he ends up marrying his fiancée, Elizabeth, and they live happily ever after. Well, sort of. As I mentioned, we have the follow-up film, the Bride of Frankenstein, with Elsa Lanchester as the bride, or the female creature. And that might be a fairly straightforward message, but I think it's one that is very timely. While we can create life, while humanity can create life in the traditional sense when we procreate, what Frankenstein did was tinker with forces that were beyond his knowledge, per se. He went into realms of science that man should not mess with. And I think that right there is one of the truly great things about the movie Frankenstein, is that we are not meant to try and forestall death or try to create life from death. Because what Frankenstein did in this movie is he took cadavers, he took bodies, and he stitched them together, and he used all of the scientific knowledge at his disposal of the time to try and create something from his own genius. And it is truly a very cautionary tale that if we are not careful, whatever we may create may end up destroying us. And I'll bring up Matt Elysium's comment here. That Dr. Frankenstein, he didn't go to evil doctor school to be called Mr. Thank you very much. And for those of you that may not get that reference, that's from the first Austin Powers movie, International Man of Mystery. So, Elysium, thank you, bud. That's a good one. And to my good friend Jeff B. Jeff, it is good to see you. Good afternoon. Glad you're here. So, but, honestly, I wouldn't necessarily say that Frankenstein is still scary. It may not ever been scary per se to the original audience or to us years and years later when the movie originally came out in the 1930s. I will say that it does carry a very strong message within it. And the story and the acting, I think, for the time and maybe beyond its time, still hold up. And it is a movie that I consistently watch every October. And it is one that I deeply enjoy. Hold on 1 second, folks. Okay, never mind. He stopped. And it is a masterpiece. It is truly a masterpiece. I mean, despite the cheesy special effects and so on, it is a masterpiece in terms of storytelling, in terms of acting, and in terms of the early special effects work and the early practical makeup work that was done within that film. So, moving along, we come to the other king of the monsters, and as of course, Dracula, portrayed by an icon in his own right. And there was always a long-standing rumor that there was a rivalry between these two actors, when in fact there was nothing but, I think, admiration and respect. And as of course, the late great Bela Lugosi. And I'll bring it just before I get into the next topic. I'll bring up Jeff's comment here. The mystery of electricity was a big feature with life creation, reanimation. Yes, Jeff, that is very, very true. Very, very true. Because if you remember, someone kept all that equipment in working order for a movie that would be a parody, but also an homage to Frankenstein. And of course, that is the Mel Brooks classic, Young Frankenstein. And I'll bring up Elysium's comment here. The message itself is scary. Not just that we shouldn't tinker with nature, but the mob mentality and dealing with it can be equally dangerous. Yes, Elysium, that is very true. Because the creature in itself was not evil. He was simply misunderstood. And he was limited by the limits of Henry's own intellect. That's all very true. And we may come back to Frankenstein later on in the stream. But as I was saying, Dracula. With, as I mentioned, one of the icons of the silver screen from the 1930s and 40s, Bela Lugosi. And you want to talk about a truly atmospheric tale. I mean, this is obviously an adaptation of Bram Stoker's novel, simply titled Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I know that there have been various remakes or adaptations, particularly I think it was in the 1990s, Francis Ford Coppola did his adaptation of Dracula with Gary Oldman, a very young Gary Oldman, and Keanu Reeves, and Anthony Hopkins, and Winona Ryder, and so on. And don't get me wrong, I love that film, and I may do a video on it somewhere down the road. But I absolutely, positively love the original Dracula just as much. And it is very atmospheric. Because, again, this just goes to show how creative Hollywood had to be back in the old days, because there were no special effects. There were no prosthetic fangs or CGI face replaces to make Bela Lugosi look more frightening. All they could do with him is slick back his hair and have him just use that very expressive face and use very creative lighting effects to make him look as menacing and as ominous and as frightening as he was to us on the screen. And I think what they did with this version of Dracula was in keeping with the themes of the book by Bram Stoker. Although I will say, Francis Ford Coppola, I think, captured the spirit of the movie or the spirit of the book better with his adaptation than the original. But that's not to say that the original isn't without its merits, because it is. And seeing, I forget the name of the actor who played Abraham Van Helsing, old man Van Helsing, not to be confused with the buff and gruff half werewolf Hugh Jackman Van Helsing. Don't get me wrong, that movie's a guilty pleasure. I love that movie. But I really have a great appreciation for the old actor who played the original Van Helsing in Dracula. And fun little fact, that same actor, I think his name was Sloan. I can't remember his first name, but I think his last name was Sloan. He also was in several of the other Universal monster movies back in the day. He was in Frankenstein. He played Victor's one of his professors from university. He was also in, I believe, The Invisible Man, if I recall. And he might have been in a few others too. But there is a very interesting tale that's taking place within Dracula. And we don't get a whole lot of backstory on Dracula, unlike what we got with Francis Ford Coppola's version, because in Francis Ford in Coppola's version of Frankenstein, we get the backstory on who Dracula was, where he came from. Yeah, Jeff B, I'll bring up your comment here because yeah, Vlad Dracul III was a real person, a real baron of Transylvania, Romania. Yeah. That's okay, Elysium. You be careful. Don't let the dog run away with you. So anyway, but yeah, the thing we have to remember about Dracula, it's an adaptation of a book that's loosely based on a real person that has had his history somewhat tinkered with, that a lot of myth has been interjected into, and it's sometimes tricky to separate the fact from the fiction. But I will say, in terms of Dracula, the fiction alone, what they did with this movie, I very much enjoyed, and it's a very gothic tale. I mean, it is truly a very gothic tale, and I, for one, that opening scene when my dog is 15, but he's still able to cause trouble. Well, just make sure he doesn't take you into any creepy looking graveyards, Elysium. Just saying, or near any ramshackle, broken down castles or mansions, because you never know what's lingering in there. There might be some 7-foot tall maniac with a lust for human blood lingering within its cellar or catacombs, if they has one. But you have that very iconic scene where, let's see, I'm trying to think of the name, Jonathan Harker, played by Edwin Fry, I think his name. Yeah, Fry. I remember his name was Fry, that much. Frederick Fry, maybe. No, that doesn't sound right. But Arthur goes to Transylvania, to Dracula's castle, and you have... Oh, yeah. Jeff B. I'll bring up Elysium's comment here. Bram Stoker was also influenced by Irish folklore that can be very dark. Yeah, because unless I'm wrong, Bram Stoker himself was Irish. So, and I'll bring up Jeff B's comment here. Nosferatu is a great film, bastard. That one freaks me out. Yeah, honestly, Jeff B, you could almost make the argument that Dracula wasn't necessarily the first vampire film, but Nosferatu, that starred one of the really great actors of the silent film era, Matt Schreck. I know they did a movie and everything. I think it was with John Malkovich, called Shadow of the Vampire, that deals with the whole production of Nosferatu. So, and yeah, that movie, that is truly... Nosferatu itself is truly a very frightening, a very haunting tale, because it is a silent film. And you don't hear any of the dialogue. It's all up there on the screen, obviously. But just the imagery from that film, and I think in some aspects as well with Dracula, when Dracula finally gets over to London, and he's walking the streets, and the little flower girl that's trying to sell flowers, he comes across her, and you see him in his cloak with his walking stick and his tall dress hat, and you just have that image of his eyes being illuminated, and him just staring the young girl down, hypnotizing her, getting ready to go in for the kill. So, I mean, that scene in of itself is absolutely, positively frightening. But as is Nosferatu, I mean, the image of Count Olaf rising from his coffin, and it's just one. He just goes. It's just so smooth and seamless when he just rises out of that coffin, and you see that absolutely hideous visage, just absolutely demonic, absolutely evil visage. Yeah, Jeffy, I was literally just talking about that. I'm bringing up Elysium. Bram was born in Dublin. I think I read about that. And I'll let's see. No, the local bugs burnt down the local mansion. The ghosts are now homeless and wandering the locality. Poor homeless ghosts. They didn't do nothing to nobody. But yeah, Jeffy, I'll bring up your comment here. The rising from the coffin, the carriage movements in Nosferatu. Yeah. And, even Dracula itself has some very iconic scenes as well. I mean, when you see him coming down that staircase and he just seamlessly walks through the giant spider web. And then you hear the wolves howling outside of the castle. And you have the absolutely iconic line. And I will not try to do a Romanian or Lithuanian or a Bela Lugosian accent because I can't. It stinks. I've tried and it stinks. But I will simply say the line. Children of the night, what music they make. And Harker looks at him and he's like, okay. And then you have the close-up of the spider walking through the web, and the Count says to him, the spider weaves the web for their weary fly. The blood is the life, Mr. Harker. If you will come this way. And Harker is never the same again. After Dracula gets his teeth into him, drives him mad, and of course you have that equally iconic scene when the ship makes harbor in London, and they go aboard and they find the ship absolutely the crew dead, drained of their blood, torn limb from limb, and the captain tied to the wheel to keep the ship on course. And then of course you hear that very deranged laugh. And they open up the hold and they see Harker, and they're like, he's gone stark raving mad. And you see the expression on his face, and he just lets out that same deranged cackle. And he's just extremely off throughout the entire film. And he gets taken to the sanitarium. He gets taken to the madhouse. And Dr. Seward's. And of course, you have the introduction of Jonathan. Well, I think it was supposed to be Harker. Yeah, it was Harker's fiance, if I remember correctly. And her friend Lucy Westenra. And Lucy is as Lucy does. She likes her fellas. She's not necessarily loose or easy or anything. She is, I think, what we would categorize as a flirt. And both of them are very strongly drawn to Dracula when he's first introduced to Dr. Seward and his fam and to his daughter and to Mina or Wilhelmina Harker. Yeah, because I think they were married at that point, I believe. But you have that very iconic scene between Van Helsing and Dracula, that battle of wills, and Dracula reaches his hand out like he's trying to will Van Helsing to come to him, and you can tell that there's some sort of strength within Van Helsing, even though he's very old at this point in his life. You almost get the sense that he's dealt with something like this in his past. And you always wondered, what did you have to face down, Abraham, that you know what this is? And of course, he pulls out the crucifix and drives Dracula away. Now, I will say, and yes, it is cheesy, and I will admit this, but the scene where Mina and one of Lucy's beaux or one of her friends or whatever is they're sitting on the balcony or I think that's about right, the balcony or the patio, and you see that very cheap looking rubber bat on a stick or on a string, and it makes that squeaky noise, and she goes, yes, of course, and he's like, who are you talking to? And she's like, oh, it's not important, don't worry about it. I know it's you have to admit that particular scene is very cheesy, but for what it is, they made it work. But of course, you have the final conflict between Van Helsing and Dracula, and though we never see it, although I will say I did like the conclusion to Coppola's Dracula, where we do see the final confrontation between Van Helsing and Dracula and Harker and Mina. You do see, I think what they did with Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula is they tried to make Dracula in that movie a little more sympathetic, whereas in the black and white version, he's just a pure villain. Because they blended a little bit of the factual history for Dracula's past into this film. He lost everything. He lost the woman that he loves, and because she committed suicide because she thought he was dead. So he renounced God. And he did what he did because he loved his wife so much. Although I don't know, they tried to make him more sympathetic, and I don't necessarily think that was a bad move. But it does make his motivation a little more reasonable, even though he is evil, but it can just show what misguided faith can drive a person to do. So, and just quick shout to the chat, Neon Sci-Fi. Neon, it is good to see you, bud. Just spent a little time this afternoon talking about the Universal monsters and their various iterations and everything, because well, it's October and it's Monster Month here on the Ambassadorial Wing, and I'm just wrapping up my discussion on Dracula. We're gonna move on to one of the other movies now, and I just want to say, looking back on these movies now and realizing just how long these characters have been around in their various forms, whether it was just in the written word, because the thing you have to remember, a lot of these movies were originally based on novels. I mean, Frankenstein, Dracula, written by Mary Shelley and Bram Stoker. Of course, you've got The Invisible Man, that was written by H.G. Wells. Jeff B. And I can respect that. I myself, I've never read any of the books, but I will say the two movies that were done, Interview with the Vampire and Queen of the Damned, I did enjoy. I did. I did enjoy the movies that were based on those two books, on two of those books that she wrote. So, but as I was saying, a lot of these movies were based on books written by, like I said, by Bram Stoker, Mary Shelley, H.G. Wells. I'm trying to think, was Wolfman based on a book? I can't honestly remember. It may not have been, but it was based on a supposed real life condition known as lycanthropy. But kind of shifting back into the discussion, you of course have the follow up to the original Frankenstein with Bride of Frankenstein, and you do see the return of Colin Clive and Boris Karloff, and you have the introduction of that quirky little doctor that is doing interesting experiments in his own right, where he creates miniature elephants and miniature people and so on. And he's like, I want to do what you did. And Frankenstein is like, no, I will never, ever do that again. And then, of course, you have the monster or the creature, once again reprised by Boris Karloff, but this time the creature speaks. It has gained the power of speech, although it's limited. It's not very, there aren't a lot of lengthy monologues by the creature. He's not standing up there, standing on screen quoting Shakespeare. But the few times that the creature does speak, they're very powerful and very chilling. And of course, you have Elsa Lanchester as the bride of Frankenstein. And they recreate the experiment that created the original creature because the creature wants a mate. A guy just wants a fella, even if she has to be stitched together piece by piece. And of course, that blood curdling scream when she sees the original creature, and she hisses at him because she's so repulsed by him. And the monster and the creature tells Victor and the other doctor, leave. We deserve to be dead. And the thing I really found truly interesting about Bride of Frankenstein is you have kind of a or was it the original Frankenstein? I can't remember now. It's been so long. It's been a little bit since I watched him. But you have it was the Bride of Frankenstein, and you have a kind of a prologue scene with someone playing Mary Shelley, and she's singing around with a couple of her buddies, and they're like, tell us about your new story, tell us about your new book. And then she starts to narrate, and it transitions just to the straight up movie. And I thought that was a really nice homage to the original work, because this obviously is Mary Shelley's brainchild. Everything Frankenstein, and I think she did write Bride of Frankenstein. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. But you want to talk about a person who was truly ahead of their time, a female author from that era, was kind of a rarity. And in particular, someone that wrote what could be considered one of the very earliest science fiction stories. Because while there are elements of horror and gothic narrative within Frankenstein, it is in a lot of ways a science fiction story, in the same way that The Invisible Man, which is quite literally one of my all-time favorite Universal monster movies. I mean, you have, and we can I'll just we'll just kind of transition over, because I really want to talk about the Invisible Man. I had never really watched this or anything. I mean, I always watched Frankenstein, I always watched Dracula, and so on. But my first introduction, I imagine this was true for a lot of people, to The Invisible Man was through VHS, when they started to transfer a lot of these older movies onto video cassettes. And Mother Ambassador was she's like, I think you should check this out too. She's like, I really think you would enjoy this. And she's like, you might be surprised who plays the Invisible Man. And play a little story about the first time I ever did watch this movie. I was sitting there with Mother Ambassador, And she's like, do you recognize the voice? I'm like, I feel like I should. She's like, just keep listening. I'm like, okay. And I couldn't exactly place it, but I knew it sounded familiar because it was from another black and white movie that I absolutely loved. And of course, you had the Invisible Man played by a really great actor of his time. Oh, good grief. I'm blanking on his name. Claude Rains. And when the credits come up, and of course, when the final scene pops up and you see the Invisible Man start to transition, and I see him, I'm like, wait a minute. That's Louis from Casablanca. And she's like, yep. Call Claude Rains. I'm like, son of a gun. I'm like, why didn't you tell me? She's like, it was more fun this way. I'm like, now you'll see where I get some of my my sense of humor. That's from Mother Ambassador. Yeah, Jeff B. It was Claude Rains. It wasn't Lon Chaney. Now Lon Chaney Sr. did the old silent Phantom of the Opera, and then of course they would do a colorized version years later with Claude Rains for Phantom of the Opera as well. And I will say that I absolutely love Claude Rains in that role. He was great as the Phantom. And again, this wasn't a character that was necessarily evil. He was just very tragic. And I'm in particular speaking of the Phantom of the Opera. Now, in terms of the Invisible Man, this, I think, is honestly one of the most interesting films because, again, it's another cautionary tale about science run amok, about man dabbling in sciences that we aren't meant to deal with. But also, yeah, Jeff, they're not just classic, they are iconic, they are, in certain respects, they are masterpieces. Because I actually had the opportunity when we got these movies on DVD, I got the chance to watch the making of for all these films, and they had all this stuff archived, and they did interviews with the actors' surviving family, because a lot of them, unfortunately, well, none of them are with us anymore. And I would imagine a lot of the family members that they originally interviewed are no longer with us either. But seeing what they did to make the Invisible Man invisible is nothing short of astounding. Because they use every camera trick that they had at their disposal to bring the Invisible Man to the screen, even though you don't see him until the absolute end. But I think one of the really great things about Rains' performance as the Invisible Man, it was his voice. It was truly his voice that carried the performance. You get a sense of this, and I forget the name of the character specifically, so I'll just refer to him as the Invisible Man. You get the idea that he was once a very rational man, a very reasonable man, a man of science, of reason, of fact. But his genius was driven mad by his obsession with figuring out how to both turn things invisible and then bring them back from invisibility. And again, this isn't a man who is necessarily evil. He was driven by the thirst for knowledge. And that in itself is a noble thing. Because the quest for knowledge is something that is inherently noble within humanity. It's unfortunately when we become so obsessed with it that we forget that there are certain things that we should not pursue. The quest for knowledge can be beneficial, but it can, if you let it, become destructive. And I think in a lot of ways, both Frankenstein and the Invisible Man are cautionary tales within that same vein. Because here you have Victor Frankenstein and the scientist who turns into the Invisible Man. Both men who are seemingly decent, law-abiding men of their time. And they are driven mad by the quest for knowledge. But kind of getting into how they were able to create the effect of Claude Rains being invisible. It was by no means easy. Like I said, they use every camera trick at their disposal of at the time to create the illusion or the effect of Rains being invisible. And they had him wrapped up in all sorts of different in gauze and black linen and everything to cloak him from the camera. And I believe they did an interview with his daughter and everything, and she told this very sweet story about how he took her to the theater to see The Invisible Man when it came out in theaters at the time. And he didn't want any notoriety. He played it very low key. He put on his, I think the story she told is he put on a very wide brim hat and a tall and I think sunglasses or something to kind of disguise his appearance. And they went into the theater, just the two of them, and there were other people in the theater as well. And the story she shared was very heartwarming, because to her, Claude Rains wasn't some big name actor. It was just her dad. And they left the theater, and she said that he asked her, what did she think? And she was like, at least to a child, it was an enjoyable film. And years later, she's reminisced about this film as well, and she's made the comment that her father never wanted to be famous, per se. He was just trying to make a living. And for her, that's what she remembers. And I think that is truly a great testament to these great old actors from yesteryear. They didn't seek fame or fortune, per se. They just wanted to entertain. And I think in certain respects, that's something that's kind of been lost in the entertainment industry to varying degrees. These actors, these actresses, the people that worked on these films, they just wanted to entertain. They want to ply their craft, ply their art, and tell these stories. And I think there's something that has been lost within that. And it is kind of sad to see, unfortunately. But I digress. I think the next film we'll discuss is The Wolfman. And this is one that I've only watched a handful of times, not because I dislike it. It's just one that kind of slips between the cracks. I mean, when you think about in terms of the great heavy hitters of the Universal monsters, you got Frankenstein, you got the Wolfman, you got the Bride, you've got and you've got like I mentioned, the Invisible Man. The Wolfman, well, he's just really hairy, and he's got a real bad case of fleas. But yeah, I will say I do like the film. I don't dislike it by any stretch. And of course, you have the great Lon Chaney Jr., the son of Lon Chaney Sr., who followed in his father's footsteps in the film industry. And This is one of his claims to fame. The Cheneys were known, both Cheney Jr. and Cheney Sr., as the men of a million faces, just like Mel Blanc, the great voice actor, was known as the man of a million voices. And for those of you who are wondering who the hell is Mel Blanc, if you ever watch a Looney Tunes cartoon from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and you hear Daffy Duck or Bugs Bunny speak, or Elmer Fudd, you're hearing a true great, Mel Blanc. And I'll bring up Jeff B's comment here. Emma Costello meets the Wolfman was great fun. Yes, Jeff, I will wholeheartedly agree with that. The Abbott Costello meets the various monsters of Universal. Those were some really goofy, silly, but entertaining films. They were campy. They were even campy by their own time standards. But in 2021, they are just as campy then now as they were then. But that's part of their charm. But speaking of the Wolfman, the on-screen transformation of Lon Chaney Jr. into the Wolfman is one of the truly great transformations ever put on film, on celluloid. And again, there is a very interesting message within this film, because we all within us, man and woman alike, we have that very primal, that very brutal aspect of our personalities, of ourselves, of the human nature, of the human condition. And I think what the Wolfman does is it brings that to life, or brings it to light. It's an allegory of the very brutal, bestial side of human nature. But it does it in a very entertaining and a very thought-provoking way. So I'll bring up Elysium's comment here. I never saw The Wolfman, but did see it referenced in Stephen King's It. Elysium, if you ever have the opportunity to watch the original black and white, I would highly recommend it that you do so, because it is a true icon of its time and even now. So, but and of course, Stephen King's It. That's another great film too. So, the remake, and I would say even the original miniseries that was done back in the 80s and everything, they are both good in their own rights. Of course, you've got Tim Curry as Pennywise, the It of It. I can't remember who played Pennywise in the remake. I'll have to look up sometime. But I have to admit, I think I need to give the Wolfman another watch, because it has been a very long time. I think it's overdue, at least in my own respect. So I'll just simply say this for the Wolfman, for old Wolfie. Would you like a milk bone? Or would you just like a nice bone? And for those of you that have dirty minds, get your minds out of the gutter. Get you a nice cow bone to gnaw on. So, but let's see. Well, let's see. We've covered Frankenstein. We've covered Dracula. We've covered The Bride. We've covered The Invisible Man. Oh yes. Now this is one I remember very well. The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Now, funny story from the Ambassadors. Skarsgård. Oh yeah, Peter Skarsgård, I think is his name. Elysium. Yeah. Thank you, bud. I appreciate that. Anyway, as I was saying, interesting story from the Ambassador's childhood. We were over at my dad's parents' house, my grandparents' house, one night for dinner, and they were going to show a TV. They had a they were going to show The Creature from the Black Lagoon on TV, but with an added bonus. You could watch it in 3D. You just had to go to like a local um, grocery store or something to get your 3D glasses. And we were all sitting in let's see, the house that my grandparents, my dad's parents had. There was the kitchen, then the dining room, and then the living room. And I remember as a young kid, the idea of watching The Creature of the Black Lagoon in 3D at my grandparents' house, because my grandparents' house was kind of creepy in itself. Not that they themselves were creepy, although they weren't particularly nice people, but that's beside the point. But the house was creepy. But the whole idea that the creature could come out and get me was very frightening, because I was like 5 or 6 years old at the time. Or maybe I was a little younger. I can't remember per se. But I told mom, mother ambassador, I was like, I don't want to watch this. I'm like, it's too scary. And she's like, honey, this creature's not actually going to come out of the TV and get you. It's just, you put these glasses on. It looks like it's going to come out of the TV. I'm like, I'm staying with you and dad. She's like, okay, you can sit with me and dad, of course. And the movie starts, and I'm sitting there with my 3D glasses on. And of course, this was before I needed regular glasses. And I finally understood. I was like, oh, it can't actually get me. It just looks like it's coming out of the screen. And I felt silly. I don't remember if we finished. I can't remember if I finished the movie, but or maybe. But I do remember us eventually leaving and going home afterwards. Let's see. But yeah, the design for the creature from the Black Lagoon, they had not really gotten anything like that before. I mean, yeah, you had stuff, and of course they did a couple sequels for Creature from the Black Lagoon, and the second one or the third one ended with the creature dying because they had tried to mutate the creature to a being that could exist on land. But unfortunately, it ended very tragically with the creature not being able to adapt to living outside of a aquatic environment, which, like I said, was kind of sad, because the creature itself wasn't necessarily malevolent. It wasn't evil per se. Man was just encroaching in on its habitat, and it didn't take kindly to that. And I can kind of understand why. I mean, again, this is another movie that has a cautionary tale, a cautionary message within it. Humanity, do not tamper with nature. Do not encroach so far onto nature, because you may awaken something that you cannot handle. Because if I remember correctly, they don't actually end up killing the creature. They just drive it away, or they supposedly kill it, but it ends up surviving. Because as I said, they did a couple of sequels to The Creature from the Black Lagoon. But I will say the suit and that they designed for the actor that played the creature, it's creepy looking. You can still, what? Hang on. Let's see if I can't find a couple of images of it. Give me just a minute, guys. Creature. Oh, here we go. Creature from the Black Lagoon. Images. Oh, wow. Trying to find. Oh, here we go. All right, give me a minute, guys, so I can share this. Oh, at least, let's see. I'll bring it. Hang on 1 second. Jeff B. The creature was the original eco-terrorist then. I guess you could say that, yeah, but I wouldn't say he's necessarily a terrorist. He was just protecting his habitat. Let's see. Here we go. Yeah. Oh, wow. I didn't. James Gunn reveals Universal's rejected. So I guess maybe they. But here, guys, is I believe this is. Let's see. Riku Brownie performing swimmingly as movie monster. NewJersey.com. Okay. So that was the name of the actor who played, or who was in the suit for the creature. But you can see that is, I would say for its time, that was a very good suit design for the creature. Of course, you got this one down here. Let's see if I can. Oh wow, that's neat. Mini bust. Huh. Oh, and hey, okay. For those of you that anything, this is actually a bust of the Invisible Man, played by Claude Rains from back in the day. Huh. $26.99 in British pounds. Not bad. But okay, I'll bring Elysium's comment here. I did the opposite with my little brother. He was being a dick, so I told him the creatures on TV could come out and get him. After the screaming was finished, I got in so much trouble. Worth it. Yeah, I would imagine, Elysium. Your parents probably like, why did you scare your little brother so badly? Or your big brother, or whatever the case may be. Oh, hey. Well, and there's Wolfie. There's the Wolf Man. Dang, they got all of them. Oh, I almost forgot. I didn't talk about him yet. I need to. Of course, there's Frankenstein, Boris Karloff with the scar and the staple inside of his head. And then there's the original Phantom of the Opera, played by Lon Chaney Sr. Cannot forget this guy. We'll talk about him next. The Mummy, also played by the great Karloff. Because at the time... Go ahead and shut that down. Come back over here. Hey. There we go. But yeah, honestly, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, I think it's also another one of those characters from the Universal catalog of monsters that kind of gets lost in the shuffle. So, if you have some time this Halloween, this October, go check him out. But also check out all the other ones I mentioned too, because they're all worth your time. But I think there's one more that I want to cover, and this is by far one of my all-time favorites in terms of the Universal monsters. And it was, I just recently did a review of the remake and sequel to this film that also starred Karloff the Great, The Mummy. This is a film that is very near and dear to my heart because I am a fan of Egyptology. I've always had the dream of traveling to Egypt, to sit on a balcony somewhere with Madame Ambassador and have a drink and watch as the sun rises or sets or both behind the Great Pyramids. Doubt that'll ever happen now, but the world being what it is, unfortunately. But The Mummy. This is by far one of my standout favorites, although these are all favorites of mine. This is by far one of my standout favorites of the Universal monsters. Not just because Boris Karloff plays the Mummy and the human incarnation of the Mummy, Ardeth Bay, but because it's, again, the makeup work that they did for the Mummy was truly astonishing. And the crazy thing is, we only see the mummy for maybe 30 seconds or maybe a little bit more in the entirety of the film. The majority of the time, Karloff is in the Ardeth Bay costume. We don't discover until toward the end of the movie that Ardeth Bay was the mummy in the first place. And you have that, I know, very cheesy but very iconic opening where you see the little model and the maquette of one of the great pyramids and the Sphinx off to the side, and they just turn it, and then on the opposite side is the title of the movie, The Mummy. And yes, it's cheesy. Yes, it's low budget, but this was Depression era filmmaking. This was made in the 1930s. So they were having to work, all of the studios were having to work within a budget. But amazingly, they created a very entertaining film, a very memorable character, a very powerful performance. And you have, like I said, you have Boris Karloff absolutely owning it as the mummy, as Ardeth Bay. And you have the flashback, of course, to when Ardeth fell in love with the Pharaoh's daughter, and he was punished for his crimes. And you see him being wrapped in the linens and placed into the coffin. And you see the absolutely panic look on Karloff's face. And if memory serves, all that reaction was authentic because he was actually legitimately scared because they had him wrapped up from head to toe in linens. So, and I'll bring up Jeff B. Yes, Jeff, I cannot disagree with this. The first Brendan Fraser mummy movie was good. Too bad Hollywood hasn't figured out how to do true horror, the old black and white horror films. Yeah, Jeff, I think I get your drift. Yeah, because I will just say this, and this is not me trying to rag on the modern horror movie, but in a lot of ways, it's all about the paranormal and about jump scares. And I'm not saying doing movies about the paranormal is bad. You can do movies within that vein and make them entertaining. But it just seems like a lot of jump scares and a lot of skewed camera angles. And to me, that's just not scary. Yeah, Elysium, you're not wrong. A lot of those special effects artists who learned their trade in those movies helped win the Second World War, tank battalions, bases, etc. Yeah, you're not wrong there, bud. You are not wrong there. But The Mummy for me is by far in my it's all these movies are in a list, and to give you all the list, it goes as thus: Dracula, Frankenstein, Mummy, Invisible Man, Bride of Frankenstein, and Creature from the Black Lagoon. That's how I rank these films, and so on. And I know that they have done sequels to many of these, and there have been various iterations, but I think the great thing about these originals, they were the inspiration for people to go back and do retellings and try and pay homage to these original black and white films and to the people who worked on them, and say, we're not trying to replace what was made before. We're trying to honor what was made before. And I think what the Stephen Sommers mummy movies did is they paid homage to the original black and whites, and they tried to tell a bigger, expansive story that couldn't have been told in the 1930s when the originals were made. So I'm not saying that it's an either or, it's a both and. Well, Karloff's will always be iconic. Absolutely, positively iconic. Brendan Fraser and Arnold Vosloo and Rachel Weisz and Jonathan Hanna, their films, I think, are just as good. Just modernized. And still keeping him within the spirit of the original work. Granted, it's a different genre. This is more of an action adventure story. Anything in terms of the Brendan Fraser Mummy movies, whereas the original Mummy is more of a gothic horror story. It works. They both work. They both can coexist, and there is nothing wrong with that. Yeah, and I'll bring up Jeff B's comment here. They're leaving a lot of money on the table. Wolfen, Cat People, Pet Cemetery are great horror, but also very old. I will tell you, Jeff, I did go see, because I have never actually seen the original, but I did go see the remake that they did of Pet Cemetery that was, I think, a couple of years ago by Stephen King. Well, that's based on the Stephen King novel. And I will tell you, I did not expect the movie to end the way it did by any stretch of the imagination. But the Cat People, I don't think I've ever actually watched Cat People. Okay, Elysium, that's awesome, dude. Truly, I like that term, retelling. I'm working on a video for the new Babylon 5 where I use that term. I will fill you in on the details later. Elysium, that's perfectly fine. Thank you, bud. But yeah, Jeff, I have to. I'll tell you the truth. Like I said, I never watched the original Pet Cemetery. It just wasn't something that was appealing to me. But for some reason, the remake, I was intrigued. And I did not, like I said, I did not expect it to end the way it did, with the entire family minus the one infant child all coming back as altered, undead yet alive. I did not expect that to any degree at all. But I did very much enjoy this. I did enjoy Pet Cemetery a great deal. And I may actually go check out the original at some point, anyhow. But getting back on topic, The Mummy, the music is, and I will say this is true, especially what they did with the when they did the DVD transfer for Dracula, and they got the Kronos Quartet, which is a string quartet, to come in and rescore the original Dracula, because the music that they had for the original score they had for Dracula was very generic, and they wanted something truly atmospheric and appropriate for a movie of Dracula's stature. And I will say that what Kronos Quartet did with their score for Dracula, it was perfect. I was kind of surprised, honestly, that they hadn't done it for all of them. But again, it doesn't ruin the experience. I will say this in all candidness. I don't think there's anything really that could ruin the experience of these original black and white Universal monster movies, because here we are in 2021, and here I am sitting here talking to you all about these films, because they have endured the passage of years from the 1930s to now, and they have never left the public consciousness. I mean, their imagery, the creature designs themselves are iconic. The names of the people that portrayed these characters themselves have become iconic. Karloff, Lugosi, Lancaster, Rains. These are all icons of cinema from yesteryear. And they should not be lost, nor should they be forgotten. If anything, they should be celebrated. And I'm glad I had the time today to sit down and talk with you all about these films, because they are just as much of my childhood as anything else I've discussed with you on this on my when I stream. And I'll bring up Jeff B's comment here. Oh, I didn't know he was in that. Welcome, Dalek Cat people. It's worth a watch, Ambassador, in my opinion. Jeff, I will figure out a way to watch that. Absolutely. So, but honestly, just to kind of wrap up my thoughts on The Mummy, it is a masterpiece. Granted, it is very dated, but it is still a masterpiece regardless. And Carlos' performance as Ardith Bay the Mummy is both terrifying but heart-wrenching, because it is a very tragic love story. Because Ardith's only crime was that he was in love with the wrong woman. But love should never necessarily be a crime in terms of the story within The Mummy itself. So. But anyways, folks, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up for this afternoon. And I want to thank you all for tuning in today. I appreciate you all being here. And if you catch us on the replay, make sure you leave your comments down below with anything I discussed today on any of these films, any of these characters. And glad you all were here today. I know it's been a long time since I've been able to do Afternoons with the Ambassador on a consistent basis, but I'm trying to do it as often as I can, and on topics that I feel are pertinent and would be entertaining for y'all to listen in on. So, as always, if you come across the stream and you enjoyed it, smash that like button and make sure to share this out with your friends. And again, I do want to thank you all for being a part of the Ambassadorial Wing, for supporting this community, for being a part of this community, because this community would be nothing without all of you, my fellow ambassadors. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, Elysium. And thank you to all of you who listened in today. I hope you all enjoyed yourselves. I will be back this Thursday night with Thriller Thursdays, and I will be bringing you all my first time watch through reviews for A Quiet Place and A Quiet Place Part 2. And then I probably am going to schedule the 450 watch party over on Twitch for this Saturday night for Highlander. So I will keep you all updated on that if anything happens to change. I don't believe anything will, but I'll let y'all know. But thank you all for being here this afternoon. We'll see you later this week. And until next time, this is the Ambassador signing off.
I have always been